It all started on a quiet stretch of land that had been in Elijah Johnson's family for generations, a lush piece of earth bordering the river with tall oaks, wild flowers, and a serenity that city planners and developers would never understand. And when the local HOA decided to build 100 weekend cabins without consulting him, citing community expansion, and assuming that a black man living quietly on the outskirts had no influence, Elijah didn't immediately react with anger, because that's not who he was. He had spent his life respecting others' space, keeping his land, his trees, and his history intact, quietly paying taxes, helping neighbors when needed, and teaching his children that dignity and patience were more powerful than conflict. But the HOA's audacity reached a breaking point when surveyors and construction crews began marking boundaries, cutting down trees, and bringing in heavy machinery to erect cabins on plots that legally belonged to him. And the community members, some curious, some supportive, began to murmur, but most underestimated him, thinking he was just a quiet old man, easy to intimidate. And Elijah, watching from his porch with his late father's binoculars, felt a quiet storm rising inside him, the kind of simmering resolve that builds over decades of being overlooked. And instead of calling lawyers first, he recalled the old family plans his grandfather had drawn, the dam gates that were part of a flood control system his ancestors had built decades ago, designed not only to manage water, but to protect their land from encroachment. And he remembered every lesson about responsibility, patience, and the power of quiet action. And on the day the construction crews arrived, the sun rising over the horizon, the smell of fresh pine and mud in the air, Elijah walked down to the dam gates, his boots heavy with history, his eyes calm but piercing, as the crew laughed at his solitude, whispering to each other that this would be an easy day of work, unaware that this man had the knowledge, the means, and the patience to turn their arrogance against them. And with one deliberate motion, he began to unlock the rusted, decades-old mechanism, every turn of the handle a memory of family, struggle, and pride. And as water slowly began to rise behind the gates, pooling silently like a coiled serpent ready to strike, the men at the construction site noticed the first signs of unease, the machinery stuttering as the ground beneath the foundation began to shimmer with the weight of the swelling reservoir. And Elijah, watching from a distance, felt a calm satisfaction, not from vengeance, but from the understanding that nature, planning, and patience often outweigh arrogance. And when the first cabin plots began to flood, the HOA members ran toward their vehicles in disbelief, their loud complaints and threats drowned by the roar of the rushing water, cameras capturing the chaos, neighbors recording from a safe distance, unable to believe that the man they had dismissed as quiet, unassuming, and powerless was orchestrating a spectacle of such precision and inevitability. And as the water surged past their cabins, dragging unfinished walls and foundation frames with it, Elijah remembered the stories his grandfather told him about respecting the land and the land respecting you back. And the irony that the very people who had claimed ownership over community expansion now scrambled in panic to save their assets while the river, guided by gates engineered decades ago, reminded them that true stewardship comes with knowledge, respect, and patience. And as the last of the water settled, leaving cabins partially submerged and plans ruined, Elijah walked calmly back to his porch, the sun casting a golden hue over the flooded plots, neighbors and bystanders murmuring in awe and fear. Realizing that he had never threatened them verbally, never screamed, yet his actions spoke louder than any argument could, and news crews arrived within hours, capturing footage that would go viral, narrating how a single man, armed with patience, history, and understanding of his land, had humbled an entire HOA and saved his property without ever raising his voice. And interviews with Elijah revealed a man who only wanted what was rightfully his, who believed that every generation had a responsibility to protect what was theirs, but also to teach respect, resilience, and the power of quiet dignity. And social media exploded with hashtags, debates, and viral clips of the flooding cabins, while the HOA scrambled for legal advice, realizing too late that arrogance and assumption cannot override planning and respect. And as months passed, Elijah's story inspired documentaries, podcasts, and thousands of comments online praising his ingenuity, restraint, and courage, reminding people that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest lessons, that patience and knowledge can dismantle arrogance faster than confrontation, and that respecting heritage, land, and history is a responsibility that once ignored comes with consequences that cannot be bargained with. And in the end, Elijah never gloated, he never sought revenge. He simply smiled as his grandchildren ran along the undisturbed banks of the river, learning a lesson their father and grandfather had embodied for generations, a lesson of justice without malice, power without cruelty, and the profound truth that those who underestimate patience, preparation, and respect for history often find themselves on the receiving end of consequences they never imagined, leaving a story that would echo for decades. A viral reminder that true strength often resides in knowledge, restraint, and an unshakable connection to one's roots, a story of land, pride, patience, and poetic justice that captured hearts, minds, and imaginations across the country.